Wow, that'll make some news today. Hey folks, first of all, welcome back. 2020, it seems like a lifetime ago that we actually gathered, and just to be able to see everyone, see so many familiar faces, friends, colleagues, it really is good to be here. I would also tell you, I feel like I'm a little bit in lawyer utopia today, right? I mean, holy smokes, I look at the 3-day agenda, every single major speaker that has an impact on what we're doing at our department or what we're doing in cyberspace has been able to talk to you or will talk to you. And I think that that is really testament to what has become for us among our most important events. Having this conference, whether or not it's today, as it's live, or it's virtual, is something that is, I think, very, very important. As Pete pointed out, being a liberal arts guy, I would say that this is the discourse that we want, right? We want this discourse to be able to talk about the impact and the importance of international domestic law in terms of what we do operationally. And so I'm thrilled to be here today. I'm really thrilled to talk a little bit about, hey, where have we been? Right? 2020 was a long time ago. And if you think next month marks 13 years for U.S. Cybercom, that's like an eternity in cyberspace. But if you also talk the fact that... Is the microphone working now? Yeah, it is. Good. Fantastic. If you also talk about the idea of where we're at today, I think that that's an opportunity that we have a bit of time to kind of explore, because right now is, as Carolyn Krass talked about yesterday, as we think about the First and Fourth Amendments with regards to integrated deterrence, as we think about the importance of what we're doing in cyberspace, it's time to give some pause to that. And then I'd like to talk to you about where we're headed as a command. So let's return to 2020. Since 2020, what's been going on? What's been going on at U.S. Cybercom? What's been going on in the broader security environment? Hard to imagine, back in 2020, how much will have changed by the time we get to 2023. I certainly begin with the security environment. I think well captured in terms of what our national security strategy says, what our national defense strategy says. This movement to strategic competition. The idea that for the past 2 decades, we in the Department of Defense really very, very focused, and rightly so, on counterterrorism and violent extremist organizations. But now the realization that our pacing challenge is China, that the acute threat to what we're seeing in the world is represented by Russia and their illegal invasion of Ukraine, but also geographic concerns that we have, whether or not it's in the Middle East or whether or not it's in the Pacific, represented by both Iran and North Korea. And I would say this, challenge that we have with borderless threats. Think about it. In 2020, the last time we met, would the majority of us have thought that 6 million people today would have perished from COVID-19, that 1 million of those would have been in the United States alone? Let's also think about, the impact of borderless change like immigration and certainly climate. But the one that, I would tell you is obviously first and foremost to me is, the border challenges and the borderless challenges of cyberspace. And let me return to 2021. 2021 for our nation is an inflection point with regards to cybersecurity. We begin the year with SolarWinds. By March, Microsoft Hafnium. By May, Colonial Pipeline. By the summer, JBS Kaseya. All have been attacked in cyberspace. We have seen supply chain, we had seen ransomware, we've seen zero-day attacks. Up until May of 2021, for the most part, I would have said, hey, ransomware, that's a legal problem. That's a legal issue that the Bureau handles. Until, of course, 43% of our petroleum products on the East Coast are flowing through a pipeline that's hit by ransomware. If that's not an example of a national security concern, nothing is. And then as we think about just the scope and scale and the capacity of our adversaries as we've progressed from 2020, we are seeing this represented in those series of different intrusions and different attacks on our nation. I would also say that if you think about some of the operational events since really we last met, we've done 2 elections since we last met.
certainly can talk about this. The template that we had established in 2018 with the Russia Small Group, this idea of being able to understand your adversary better than they understand themselves, share information in support of a series of lead agencies like the FBI and CISA, and then impose cost. That our adversaries understand that there are consequences for attempting to interfere or influence our elections. For us at U.S. Cyber Command, we also went through a period of, hey, we need to surge on ransomware. Again, this idea, if it's a national security concern, hey, guess what? Our command is going to be in the center and forefront of what's going to be going on there. And so partnering again with the National Security Agency, how do we bring the authorities, the capacities, the capabilities, and the know-how to what has been a very, very difficult problem? Hunt forward operations. Let me just rewind just a bit to 2018. This idea of several folks within the National Security Agency and U.S. Cyber Command have said, hey, wouldn't it be great if we could send 8 to 10 folks at the invitation of a foreign government to their country to hunt on their networks for adversaries' malware and tradecraft? And then let's share that information. Not us share that information, the private sector share this information. Since that, kind of reflection and the beginning in Kyiv, Ukraine in 2018, 22 different nations we have worked with hunt forward operations, 47 different operations on 70 different networks. This idea of partnership lives within hunt forward operations. This is how collectively we all get better. We're all more secure. We're all more active in being able to address our threats. And then, of course, Russia, Ukraine. The fact that we had a hunt forward team on the 3rd of December 2021 in Kyiv, that they were working with Ukraine, that they were a presence. Remember, physical presence still matters. As a former boss told me, virtual presence is real absence. Physical presence matters. And why does that matter? Because you are right there working with a partner to understand what they're experiencing. Being able to see the tradecraft of our adversaries, being able to see the malware that's actually being utilized against the network, being able to provide close counsel to those that are experiencing actual cyber attacks. It's also a conduit as you're physically present, right? Because guess what? Everyone that wants to help a nation always wants to talk to someone on the ground. And I would tell you what our team told us as they landed at Kyiv on the 3rd of December 2021 is that, hey, we're not going home anytime soon. We won't be home for the holidays. We're going to be here to make sure that our partner is well prepared. And credit to Ukraine. Amazing what they've been able to do. Also amazing in terms of today's discussions on public-private partnership. This is the power of what we do in cyberspace. Bringing together a series of partners to include the private sector and doing it so effectively as demonstrated in Ukraine. What also has changed since 2020 are a series of different structural changes that may, be a little bit less than obvious to all of you, but I think are important for me to communicate. In the summer of 2020, the then Secretary of Defense held a combatant command review and asked all 10 combatant commands at the time to come and talk to him about what's your missions, your capabilities, your capacities, and where you need to go. In the summer of 2020, we laid out for the Secretary of Defense all of those areas. And what came of it? Here's what came of it. A growth in the number of teams. 14 additional teams that we're going to build. So we go to 133 to 147. Second is the idea that we needed to have one area that handled our advanced training. One service, and that service was the Army. And so our advanced cyberspace operational training now being done at Fort Gordon and being led by the Army. The next thing that we learned is the fact that, hey, it was really important that we had a series of different service-like authorities. Okay, service-like authorities. What are those? Service-like authorities are those things such as training, enforced provision, and acquisition that allow a combatant command to operate more and more like a service. And why is that important? Because everything that we have learned in cyberspace is tied to really three things: speed, agility, unity of effort. You get speed and agility through different authorities, as we all know. But the ability to rapidly change, the ability to do things such as, hey, we're going to invest our money here. And oh, by the way, in the summer of 2020, this idea of enhanced budget control. Mr. Secretary, I'm very interested in maybe controlling all the money that the services have for cyberspace with regards to U.S. Cyber Command. It was a pretty interesting argument, I thought, and it was helped develop by a series of my close advisors and some really talented lawyers. But it was a powerful argument because it's based upon what we had seen successfully done by U.S. Special Operations Command. A little bit different in the sense of, how we were going to do it, but I would tell you still the same idea. Being able to provide the resources to the person that has the authorities and responsibility that's operating in the domain. So this is called enhanced budget control. This is significantly different from the last time we met. And in fact, we're going to start executing enhanced budget control in FY24. A huge effort in terms of what we're doing. But here's the other piece. For someone who has commanded the Cyber National Mission Force, we were able to, last year, elevate it to a sub-unified command. And why is that important? Because it gives it the stature and, I would tell you, the authorities that are representative in a sub-unified command. This idea that the services treat the command differently for manning and recognition of talent. And being able to utilize that as our premier force has been something really important to us. But here's the other thing that I would tell you in terms of what's changed since we last met, is the idea of partnerships. And this is truly, the piece that I'd like to make sure that you take away from here is that our partnerships in 2020 were much different than they are in 2023. We had a very, very great understanding of this idea of the partnership between U.S. Cyber Command and the National Security Agency. We also had a growing understanding of the partnership within the interagency, the importance of FBI and CISA in terms of what we were doing, formed most prominently by our work in election security. But what's happened since then really is this idea that industry and international partners and academia are going to be huge to what we need to do. So I'll come back to that in a second. How about legal support? Let me talk a little about the legal support in 2020 as the way I saw it. Okay, having known every single staff judge advocate since Gary Brown was our first and now Pete Hayden is our latest, I would tell you this is what our legal focus was on in 2020. First of all, this idea of policies and authorities, different and changing policies. What did National Security Policy Memorandum 13 mean to us? How did we work it so effectively? What does it mean to be a traditional military activity? This is where I lean very heavily on my staff judge advocate to say, hey, what does this do in terms of the authorities and the capabilities and the way that we're able to operationalize our force? Here's the other thing that's completely different, and I'm sure George Smalley would tell you, is that the pace in 2020 is nothing like the pace in 2023. But the pace in 2020 had grown significantly, where lawyers were very, very busy in a series of mission packages and things such as taking a look at, hey, what does it mean to do acquisition? And what does it mean to be in the midst of labor law? And things that are foundational to what our command does. And the beginning of 2020 was this idea of how do we engage with the private sector? We relied heavily on the staff judge advocate and his attorneys to really understand what are the limits, the left and right limits of what we can do with the private sector. Right? It's pretty narrow at first. Really, it's the defense industrial base. This is where the authorities that are resident with the Secretary of Defense come down. But then this idea of being able to bring the law and what we're seeing in the domain together started to take root. Because we realized that there were other entities that we had to be able to engage with to ensure that we're able to secure the nation in cyberspace. One of the key tasks that's given to me by the Secretary of Defense and the President. So it's just at that time in 2020 starting to take hold and starting to germinate in how we do this. So we go forward in terms of 2020. Let's talk about where we're at today. Where we're at today is integrated deterrence. I think I read yesterday's speech by Carol, and I thought she did an outstanding job talking about integrated deterrence and how we bring in the First and Fourth Amendments, how we base it in this idea of international and domestic law. I would tell you from our perspective as we look at integrated deterrence, it does begin with this idea of being able to operate with different commands in different domains and different partners. But it's also this idea of, hey, and we know this very, very well, that second piece of being able to campaign each and every day. Remember, this is what persistent engagement is. We talked about this last time in 2020. In fact, I said, hey, this is a fundamental piece of what the command does. We base it on the DoD strategy of defend forward, operating outside the United States, ensuring that our adversaries can be engaged before they come into America. And I said it's about persistent engagement. It's the idea of being able to both inform and to act. Inform with incredible intelligence and act when authorized. And campaigning to us, as I just described, is this idea of every single day. An adversary understands that whether it's a hunt forward mission or it's an engagement with the private sector or it's an engagement with a different series of interagency partners, that we want to shine a light on this activity. And so moving from this idea of the binary of, hey, we're either at peace or war, to we're either at some point of, continuum of campaigning or crisis or conflict. And that certainly has taken hold at our command. And then the last piece, building enduring advantage. Building enduring advantage. For us, take a look at the joint cyber warfighting architecture. This is where we're headed. This is this idea of how do we bring together 7 different elements of the things that we need to do under one program executive to be able to have the capacity and capability to engage with our adversaries. Whether or not that's training, whether or not that's command and control, whether or not it's a series of sensors, this is our enduring advantage. But as I talk about all of that, it's all based upon the foundation of our people, the foundation of our talent. Because I would tell you, even after 5 years, if someone says, hey, what's the secret to Cybercom success? It all comes back to the talent that we're able to recruit, train, and certainly retain. And so one of the things since 2020 we thought about is, hey, what's our ethos? What is the reason people are at U.S. Cyber Command when a young military person or a young civilian says, hey, what's the baseline for what we do? We said we needed a code. And so this is that code. This idea that we're going to win with people, that we're going to seize the initiative. This idea that we partner, we employ, we deliver. And that's codified in terms of this idea of persistent engagement. We can't do persistent engagement without those 3 things. Continually campaigning, and obviously looking to own the domain. Guess what? That wasn't developed by a bunch of flag officers on the 8th deck of our building, our headquarters. It was developed by a chief master sergeant with a series of different military members and young civilians to say, how do we talk about what we do? So when you come into our command, this is a distinctive component of it. This is what we talk about. This is what we say is our baseline for our action. This is how you should perceive how you are part of U.S. Cyber Command. Let's talk a little about where we're at with legal support now as well. So today, one of the things that I would tell you is that, I would indicate it was pretty busy in 2020. It's nowhere close to what it's like in 2023. The 14 different lawyers that work for Pete Hayden, the well over 20 plus lawyers that are in our subordinate headquarters, every single day is a series of different reviews, whether or not it spans from operational to admin law. Whether it's being able to look and say, hey, this is what international law says, and this is how we are approaching it, and this is our counsel to you. For a series of different commanders from myself, all the way down to the 2-star that heads Cyber National Mission Force. The other thing is that legal teams at every single operational level. I have noted that my J3 has become pretty adept at legalese when he talks to me. I said, where did you get those terms? Well, of course, he has got very, very good legal support within the J3. Because that's a little bit about where he operates today, right? In a series of different discussions, not only with Office of Secretary of Defense for Policy, but also at times with the National Security Council when questions are offered to him. Here's the other piece that's interesting, our National Defense Authorization Act. Every single year, Congress issues the National Defense Authorization Act. One of the things that our legal team is heavily involved is, first of all, being able to categorize what's in the NDAA. Hey, we are very interested in being able to work broadly with a series of different partners. So 1642B, which covers this idea of being able to be more expansive with regards to the partners that you're able to work with. One of the things that was put into there by the Senate Armed Services Committee after discussions with us to say, how do we do a better job of securing the nation in cyberspace? That comes from this discussion of, our legal staff saying, hey, sir, here's your authorities. Here's the remit upon which you can work left and right. And this is how you're able to operate today. But if it was to change, this is where you can go. We learned this, first of all, in 2019 with our National Defense Authorization Act that talked about cyber as a traditional military activity. But now it lives today. And I would say for those that obviously operate within the confines of our legal staff, this is a key piece of what we're looking for in terms of counsel, what we're looking for in terms of ideas. So that takes me to the future. As we think about the future, let me show this slide. This is really our strategy as we look to the future. First of all is to sharpen what we're doing, then to strengthen, and then to execute. Our number one priority at our command today is readiness. Readiness through the ability of our people and our equipment. But it's also this idea of being able to strengthen our role in competition, crisis, and conflict. And how do we do that? We do it through a series of partnerships. We do it through, obviously, our partnership with the National Security Agency, our partnership with the interagency, our partnership with industry, our partnership with the interagency, and our partnership internationally. But here's another one that's grown, is our partnership with academia. 100 plus different universities today, part of the academic education network. Those 100 plus universities provide us a capacity to tell our narrative, tell our story, and also ask for assistance. This idea, again, returning to the liberal arts model, of which I know pretty well. Being able to have this discourse, being able to have this idea of, hey, this is what we do at our command. These are the areas that we're facing, and these are the ideas that we could use help on. We learned this a lot in 2018 when we started to engage with a series of different academic institutions talking about influence operations. It matured in 2020 as we brought in more academic institutions. And today, the 100 plus institutions provide us, obviously, that conduit to have these discussions that are so important. The other piece I would tell you is that being able to execute our authorities. I talked a little bit about service-like authorities. How do we bring the service-like authorities that we have today resident and to life? How do we ensure that the authorities that are granted to us as a command are executed properly and within the resource constraints of what Congress has given us? So that's a little bit about where we're at today. So the future is a bright future for U.S. Cyber Command. The future is one that we think increasingly of the 5 different domains, air, land, sea, space. We're the only man-made domain. But we are also, I would tell you, a domain upon which all 4 always need to be able to operate. So as you gather today, as you spend a bit of time over the next day plus being able to discuss these topics, we're excited about where we're headed with regards to U.S. Cyber Command. And we're very, very excited and very, very proud of the work that our legal team does here at U.S. Cybercom as well. So with that, ladies and gentlemen, I'm more than happy to take a series of questions. If you have, we'll start with the easy ones, and then the hard ones we'll leave for another day. A room full of lawyers and no questions. Wow. Pete Pascucci, I'll give you the first question.
Morning, sir. You talked about a lot of the changes that have occurred over the NDA over the years. If you could get one other thing changed today, flick of a pen, what would you like to see changed?
So I think it has to do with the way that we look at readiness in terms of, I talked about our number one strength is our people. But I think that as I take a look at it, we're going to need to have people that spend more time at U.S. Cyber Command than less. And so however that's done in terms of how the services provide us a continual stream of people, or maybe it's repeat tours, or maybe it's incentives for more of our young people to retain in our military force or our civilian force, I think those are areas that really intrigue me. Thanks. I cut someone else off that had a question. Sir.
Morning, sir. Thank you very much for the excellent presentation. Just out of curiosity, you spoke of service-like authority, obviously Canadian. Not 100% sure what that means, but it sounds awesome. So,
well, I'm from Minnesota, so I've lived next to you my entire life, I think so.
But with that change in service-like authority, sir, do you see a transition to a new separate cyber force akin to like Space Force or things like that? Or why or why not? What would the arguments be in favor or against, sir?
So here's the way that I've kind of watched it. I'm intrigued by the development, the capacity, and the capabilities of U.S. Special Operations Command. Stood up in the mid to late 80s, and over a period of 2 decades becomes the premier, I would say, special operations force in the world. And maybe I'm a bit, subjective on that, but I would tell you that their baseline of work is pretty impressive. I think they did it, from the way I look at it, being able to be very agile and very speedy. And I think it's all based upon the operations that they conducted very well. So I take that template and I say, I'd like the same template for what we're doing in cyberspace. And I want to be able to be very agile because I know that the threats that our nation faces are very, very unique and very, very adaptive. I want to do this through a series of operations. I'm operating continually. And that's, I think, where we have gotten much better as a command. I mean, for those of you that were in U.S. Cyber Command, 7, 8 years ago, we weren't doing many operations. And my own distinctive feel is that you don't get much better watching PowerPoint slides. You do get much better doing operations. And so my focus is really on that. That's why I'm very, very intrigued by continuing to take the service-like authorities and adapt them to what we need to do and become even better than we are today. Does that make sense?
Yes, sir. Thank you very much.
You bet. Sir.
Morning, sir. Frank Shaw from Army Cyber. Where do you see the DoD policy going with respect to publicly available information? And do you see any consternation or conflict with that with Congress? Over.
I'm sorry, it got a bit garbled. Can you slow down just a bit?
Yes, sir. Just the DoD policy with publicly available information. Where do you see that going? And do you see any conflict with Congress over that policy?
So, I guess I haven't followed the discussions on publicly available information as closely as I should be as Commander of U.S. Cyber Command. And so perhaps a bit of this is still to be developed. So I think I'm going to hold on that question before I answer it, if I could. Thanks. Sir.
Sir, Mike Tomas from Air Force JA. My question is, yesterday we heard from Mr. Wales at CISA, and he talked a lot about the democratization of technology and the availability of different techniques and the possibility of more nefarious cyber actors being able to operate. And I guess my broad question is, do you think that as a nation, our critical infrastructure, our technology, our defense industrial base is more vulnerable today than it was 3 years ago, or less vulnerable? And regardless of what the answer is, why is that?
Yeah, I mean, as someone that is always thinking about securing the nation's cyberspace, I'm always concerned about and vigilant about our critical infrastructure. And so I would tell you that, as adversaries continue, and I remember I said scope, scale, sophistication is increasing in what we've seen since 21. And so my offer to you is that we need to be as agile and as focused on being able to secure that critical infrastructure. And so my thought is, okay, how do we continue to stay ahead of our adversaries? And I would tell you the way that we do that is through a series of partnerships. We are not, there is not one organization today that can do all that we need to do to secure our critical infrastructure. So having Brandon Wales here, hearing from the FBI, hearing from ONCD, I think is really important. Because, to Chris Inglis's point, to defeat one of us, you have to defeat all of us, I think is a pretty decent point. So what have we learned in that? well, let's take a look at Russia, Ukraine in terms of what does the private sector bring to a nation that may suffer an attack on their critical infrastructure. 24th of February, Viasat goes down from an offensive cyberspace attack by Russia. And soon afterwards, we have Starlink that's come up based upon the agreement between Elon Musk and President Zelensky. So that's I think a demonstration of the resiliency that we need in critical infrastructure. And so that's where I think Mr. Wales' points are really critical for us to be able to execute. And that's where we're focused on being able to do that as well. Sir.
So thank you. Sean Moore from the UK Strategic Command. You talked a little bit about partnerships, and we're increasingly learning how to operate better together. But how can we leverage those partnerships to better fight the legal and diplomatic battle space, in that battle space around the challenges from Russia and China who are trying to reset the order around cyber and how we operate?
So I think one of the most effective ways of doing it is being able to shine a light on malicious activity. And let me give you an example. In the fall of 2021, the president makes a very, very, I think, courageous decision to release intelligence, some of our most sensitive intelligence about what Russia was going to do. And guess what? What did it do? It built a coalition, it disrupted an adversary, it empowered a partner. Now we've seen that along the way as well, right? So when we start seeing malicious cyber activity, being able to use a consortium of private cybersecurity vendors and saying, hey, this is what we're seeing, being able to publicize that, I think changes behavior. And so this is a little bit of, I think, the instruction that we should take from what we've seen over the past couple of years. Other questions? Gary.
Morning, sir. Speed, agility, unity of effort, obviously a current theme throughout and through campaigning. How do you see the impacts of machine learning, true artificial intelligence on the horizon, and the decision speed that's pushing, fitting into all that, and what challenges are there?
Yeah, I mean, so just think about, let's rewind the clock 10 weeks ago. I don't think most Americans really understood what artificial intelligence and machine learning were really like until ChatGPT came out and people started logging in saying, whoa, this is fascinating. And then Sunday, of course, we see Bard by Google, right? And that's demonstrated in two different segments within 60 minutes. And all of America now is starting to talk about what's going on here. As I think about artificial intelligence, first of all is, oh my gosh, there's a tremendous amount of policy and legal work to be done here. My sense is that many of you in this room are going to be leading that discussion. Right? I have tremendous interest in being able to leverage artificial intelligence. And certainly as I think about it on the defensive construct, I think about it, like self-healing networks and being able to identify it. And as an intelligence professional, I would tell you, boy, what would it do to the analysis and how fast we could do analysis with a tremendous amount of data, or the large language models that will provide us an ability to have, language, you get the argument right there. But I also know that, think about what it provides our adversaries as well. And I'm thinking, obviously, election security, first and foremost. That's kind of been what we've experienced. And I'm thinking about, what does this do to influence models and deep fakes and stories that are going to run? And how are we going to be able to do, identify that type of work? And how are we going to be able to work with a series of different partners to be able to make sure that we can identify and shine a light on things that truly aren't true? But here's the other thing I think is that, I was reading an article as I was coming here today about this topic and the impact that it's going to have on the workforce of, the future. Most legal services, sounds like from that article, was going to be replaced by some form of AI in the future. And so it's going to have a tremendous impact even on your profession and how we're going to think about that. But I do begin with this idea of we're going to need the policy and authority constraints really well spelled out here. And we're going to need to do this pretty quickly because our adversaries aren't waiting to do this. Sir.
Sir, Kurt Sanger, Cyber Command Alumni Club. How are you?
You look good.
A little more hair than last time. So as I've been moving out of the command and into the private sector, there's a number of organizations that have expressed interest and enthusiasm about NSA's Cyber Collaboration Center and the Cyber National Mission Forces Under Advisement Program. Wanted to ask about how those efforts are going and whether they've had an impact on Cyber Command's operations.
Yeah, I think it's a great one. So Kurt is talking about the work that we have done both, and I'll talk about the agency and the command. Okay, in 2019, I made a determination that I wanted to stand up a cybersecurity directorate. And one of the things that I learned having asked a study group to take a look at this is the fact that somehow we have to be able to engage with the private sector, right? I mean, this is where 90+% of the critical infrastructure is. This is where the majority of forensics and analytics are being done. And so one of the things we decided is, hey, we're going to stand up a completely unclassified center. We'll call it the Cyberspace Collaboration Center. And it's really great as a commander, you can just say those things, right? You just say, hey, in 1 year we're going to do this. Well, guess what? There's a lot of people that say, hey, I don't think we can do that. Oh, sure we can. 1 year later, we cut the ribbon on the Cyberspace Collaboration Center. And it stands outside of NSA's fence line. It engages with a series of 300+ defense industrial-based companies, and it's doing this 24/7 in an unclassified medium. What has that done? It's driven the bar for cybersecurity much higher within the defense industrial base, I think. But here's the other thing it's done. It's also provided us indications and warning at time of things that are happening, right? Anomalies that are happening in cyberspace. For a command and an agency that do not operate in the United States, this idea of, hey, something's happening here and the private sector is seeing it, provides us an insight that's truly a canary in a coal mine type of moment. But we did the same thing with U.S. Cyber Command. It's called under advisement. And so a series of roughly a dozen really talented young men and women from our military services, guess what? They operate every single day in an unclassified medium talking about what's going on. And large corporations, coming in to say, hey, what are you seeing? What's going on? What's happening? Now, why would anyone do that? Well, this is why they'll do it, is the fact that we learned a very valuable lesson. It's not all about getting. It's also about giving. And when you have that continuous dialogue in cyberspace, when you're giving information, you're getting information. The other thing I think is very important, and I think my director of cybersecurity, Rob Joyce, has said this very well. We don't classify things necessarily for what we know about it, it's how we know it. And guess what? If someone else knows it, being able to talk about unclassified, that's pretty powerful. And so I think that this is representative of, again, this idea of partnerships matter. And partnerships with the private sector, they matter a lot. And the last thing I would say, coming back to our code, the reason folks call in is because when they call in, they talk to someone that's an expert that can talk about what they're doing. It's not like this. Hey, I have blah, 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 blah. Hey, hold on a second. I'll find someone that knows something about that. Okay, that doesn't work. But actually having a young person or someone that is a subject matter expert, having that conversation, Kurt, as you know, that's gold. And that will give and get. Thanks for the question. Other questions? Sir.
Sir, Lieutenant Colonel Sander of the Army Reserve. You've mentioned earlier about Cybercom having service-like authorities. I was wondering what your view would be on a cyber force, aka the model of the Space Force, where you would have a service who would actually be doing recruiting, retention, be able to focus on the cyber warriors and recruiting some of those Americans versus traditional service roles such as an infantry or a pilot or a ship sailor. And would that help with the long-term approach to these challenges we're going to be facing in the cyber domain?
Yeah, thanks for your question. So I begin with the end state. What do I want? I want the most capable force and the largest force that we have that's the best in the world. Okay, how hard can that be, right? And that's what we talk about at U.S. Cyber Command. And how do we get to that? In my perspective, my experience, what we're focused on is being able to do operations all the time. Being able to have a series of agile authorities like acquisition or personnel or force provision or training. Again, it comes back to what I have seen with Special Operations Command. They didn't create a service for Special Operations Command. What they did is they focused on a command and providing it the necessary authorities to be agile and be speedy and be able to work across a series of different services, which I think is really important. So that's where I'm at with it in terms of looking at it. Sir.
Good morning, sir. Dane Bloxman, JTF Aries. Sir, what keeps you up at night?
What keeps me up at night? I think about two things. I would tell you, first of all, I think about talent. Every single day, I think about talent. How do we recruit that talent? How do we train that talent? How do we retain that talent? How do we return that talent? Right? How do we return that talent? When someone leaves our force and goes off to the private sector, I'd like to make it as easy as possible for them to come back to our command or our agency. Here's the second thing I think every single day about our national security. And I primarily think about the strategic competition in which we're in today. For most of you in this room, you entered the service or government service at a time when it was post-Cold War. I came in at the end of the Cold War. And so I remember what it was like in terms of having a primary adversary in terms of what was going on. It was a threat to our nation. And so as we think about, what is the pacing challenge today, which is China, or we think about what is the acute threat that's Russia, my thoughts are focused on how do I ensure the security of our nation as I look at those two things. But to be very honest with you, there's probably relatively little that keeps me up at night because I'm exhausted. So, one more question, okay. Sir.
Sir, Colonel Nate Kearns, National Guard Assistant at U.S. Cyber Commander Colonel Hayden. I have a question about, there's 54 states and territories, commonwealths, and some of those forces are incredibly powerful and well robust. Some are nascent, given pushes by governors, and yet there are some incredible reserve component members that are senior leaders or experts in their field. How do we better leverage getting them in the fight, part of the fight, utilization of those guard forces, and even given some of the potential challenges of getting clearances for those who want to be a part of that process, sir?
So great question, and a great one to conclude on. So first of all, I come back to partnerships, right? In partnerships, one of the things that that I learned early on was that when we sent this Hunt Forward team to Ukraine, the leader of the Hunt Forward team called back and said something like this: "Hey, great news! Landed in Kyiv, and when I got off the plane, this lieutenant colonel met me." I was thinking, lieutenant colonel, okay, cool. This lieutenant colonel who said that they knew everybody in Ukraine. They know the prime minister, know minister of defense, minister of interior. If you need anything, just please talk to us. And that lieutenant colonel from the California Army National Guard, who had been going there for well over a decade, who was part of the state partnership program, who has been developing capacity and capability in the country of Ukraine through a series of exercises and training initiatives and partnership activities. And I thought to myself, boy, this is the representation of competitive advantage. Why would we not take advantage of that? That's exactly what we should think about. This is why the total force means so much. A couple other things I would say on that as well. The second piece is we have to think better about equivalency. We have a very, very set training program in terms of how we train our operators. Okay? There are a lot of folks that operate in the private sector that have tremendous skills and capabilities and don't have the ability to spend 6 months, let alone 6 weeks, away from their homes and their jobs to go train. But if there's some way we can get equivalency and they can show that they have mastered the skills of what we need them to do, why would we not grant that? And the last piece I would tell you is that folks are really, when I go and see both the Reserve and the National Guard elements, they're anxious to work with us. And so again, whether or not it's through a Hunt Forward team, whether or not it's through the work that Army Cyber is doing with a series of different National Guard and Army Reserve units, bringing them into our operations, which we're doing every day as part of persistent engagement, I found out that why most people stay in the military and stay in our command and stay in our agency is being able to do really cool missions. So let's make sure they're doing really cool missions. Thanks for your question. Folks, as I conclude today, let me just say thanks. First of all, let me personally say thanks to my own SJA and a series of different SJAs that have supported me throughout my time here. But I would tell you also thanks for the important work that you do. We are a nation of laws. We are, partners in democratic institutions that are based upon the rule of law. And so conferences like these, I think, remind us about the advantage that we have as a nation and a series of nations. Thank you very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, we're on break until 10 o'clock.
Ares, the Greek god of war and courage. Fitting. As a Joint Task Force commander under U.S. Cyber Command, JTF Ares serves as the commander's maneuver element to tackle emerging and difficult problems. Stood up in 2016 with the stated goal of countering the threat of the Islamic State, JTF Ares demonstrated immediate success. Declassified reporting has outlined the successes of JTF Ares, such as Operation Glowing Symphony, which dismantled ISIS's global media production and dissemination apparatus, striking a critical blow to their ability to spread propaganda, raise funds, and inspire further radicalization of violent extremist ideology. These successes required unique partnerships and coordinated operations across the interagency and international allies, which continue to this day. In 2018, command of JTF Ares was transitioned to Marine Corps Forces Cyberspace Command, which allowed for an expansion of missions across multiple violent extremist organizations. This transition was also a natural fit, as Joint Force Headquarters Cyber Marines serves as the general support arm of U.S. Cyber Command to U.S. SOCOM and their global counter-VEO mission. As a result of JTF Ares operations, the global presence of violent extremist organizations is continually under pressure and has decreased dramatically. Due to shifting national security strategic priorities, in early 2021, the Commander U.S. Cyber Command began to transition JTF Ares towards the strategic competition problem set. Nearing 2 years into this mission shift, JTF Ares stands ready to counter our pacing threats and deter aggression in competition and crisis. Interested in war and courage? Reach out about serving with Joint Task Force Ares.